Washington now. We can talk to Senator Dan Coats. Senator Coats, just give us your perspective, if you will.
I think there's a lot of skepticism in terms of how this will ultimately play out. There have been a lot of concessions that have been made through this. We have 60 days here as a Congress to evaluate every detail of what has been decided. At that particular time, we will then have to make a decision as to whether to approve or disapprove this. And of course, the President plays a major role because he has already announced that he would veto anything that was disapproved. That means that we need a two-thirds vote of both Republicans and Democrats in order to override that veto if we determine this is not in the best interest of our country.
Right. I wondered what you were pushing for in that perspective. What are your concerns?
My concerns are the concessions that have been made from the opening statement in terms of where we thought Iran should go or not go. And there was unanimity that Iran in possession of any kind of nuclear weapons capability was destabilizing for the Middle East, would start a nuclear arms race, and would be dangerous for the free world. That has been given away. We've bought time, assuming Iran abides by all the principles that are enshrined in this particular agreement. There's not a lot of trust for Iran, and they've not really done anything to earn that trust. But it's a big bet on whether or not Iran will, number one, do what they said they have agreed to do and agree with us in terms of interpretation of this agreement, and what they will do once the 8 to 10 years expires, which that allows them to go forward and develop the nuclear weapons. So we may be just postponing a situation that puts us in a worse situation in the future.
Now, you mentioned the issue of there not being a lot of trust towards Iran, but President Obama says this deal isn't based on trust, it's based on verification.
Well, our former President Clinton said that in 1994 when we signed the agreement with North Korea. We were assured by the President that we had every thing in place to assess and determine verification. That was not the case. North Korea cheated. They now have more than a dozen nuclear weapons sitting atop ballistic missile delivery systems. And so we, I think, need to think about that history before we rush to judgment on whether or not this is a good deal or not.
I mean, I wonder what your ideal agreement would be. I mean, we were in a situation where even military action was being considered. What was your thoughts with regard to that?
Well, to pose that as the only alternative, I think, is a false proposal. I'm quite certain that the sanctions had a defining effect on the Iranians' decisions here, but and that can always continue. We could have ratcheted up those sanctions. The proposal that the only alternative to not agreeing to this agreement is war against Iran, I think, is a false choice. There are other options there, and we, the P5+1, should be negotiating from a position of strength, not weakness. And yet it seems that Iran was negotiating from strength, and we were the ones doing all the concessions.
Yeah, you mentioned right at the beginning of this interview that President Obama can veto any attempts to block this. You are going to try and get this supermajority, this two-thirds majority in Congress, as an alternative way through.
That is, but I do think, yes, we are, if we conclude that the agreement is not in our best long-term interest. But I think each of us has a responsibility here to look at this very carefully and not to just make a quick knee-jerk decision as to whether this is best for the future of the world, the free world, or whether this is not. And so I think we need to carefully look through this agreement this next 60 days and come to a judgment and a determination of what is best, not only for the Middle East, but what is best for the future of the world.
Senator Dan Coats, thank you very much for talking to us there from Washington.